Hi everyone, and welcome back to the CWP. We have 2 stories to share with you guys today, but before we jump into the readings, we have a couple of announcements to make. This Thursday, October 15th from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m., the Creative Writing Program will be holding an MFA talk live on Zoom. At this Q&A session, 3 Winthrop alumni who are currently enrolled in MFA programs will be answering any questions that you may have about creative writing and about MFA programs in general. If you're interested in attending this cultural event, head over to our social media pages at Winthrop CWP for more information. This week's first selection is Babyland, a short story by Hayley Neiling. Hayley received both her BA and MA in English from Winthrop. During her time here as a student, Hayley was president of the Literary Society and worked as the assistant director for the Writing Center. She currently teaches Writing 101 and works in Charlotte as a technical writer and a graphic designer. She also works with Craft Literary Magazine as a reader for prose submissions. And now for our first selection, Babyland, read by Lynn Horton.
Babyland. Ever since Cam got beat up at a gas station in North Carolina last winter, I felt nervous about filling up my gas tank anywhere further than 5 miles from my house. So when Ava took the nearest exit and turned into the Sunoco off of I-85, I immediately stuck my head between my knees so as to not be seen in the passenger seat. Cam was way more butch than me. It was in the way she walked, but I couldn't help but notice the similarities in our appearances, the shortness of our hair, the baggy fit of our shirts. I didn't like being here at a Sunoco with only 2 gas pumps. I wish you would tell me where we were going, I told Ava as she opened her car door. I told you it's a surprise, Summer. She smiled, unperturbed by our rural surroundings. Her long hair and loose-fitting blouse drew less attention. Just sit tight, she reminded me before shutting the door and closing me in the heavy southern heat. Our 3-year anniversary was coming up that week, and Ava had told me the day before to pack a bag. I felt blood starting to pool in my head, and I pulled out my phone and sat it between my feet to scroll through Instagram. Almost immediately, Cam rolled onto my screen as if I had summoned her by appropriating her traumatic experience. She stood sideways in front of a mirror, smiling with only the left side of her mouth, lip ring gleaming, eyebrows hoisted up as far as they could go. Her left hand rested on her stomach, which poked out ever so slightly, almost unnoticeably, under her baggy Tar Heels t-shirt. Her wife, Jasmine, stood behind her beaming. The caption read, "Baby Jennings, coming April 2021. Hashtag and a baby makes 3. Hashtag can't wait to meet our little one. Hashtag love you so much already. Hashtag 2 mommies. Hashtag macho mom. Hashtag fuck gender roles." I stared for a moment before tapping the picture twice. Again, the similarities in our appearances struck me. But where there was an ease to her posture, mine curled inward, only made worse by the suffocating fetal position I had forced myself into. The driver's side door opened, and Ava slid back into the car, bringing with her a fresh circulation of hot air. I cranked my body back into a sitting position and handed my phone to her. "Cam and Jasmine are having a baby?" I asked. As she stared at the phone, I watched a huge smile splinter across her face. "Oh my God, they are!" she shrieked. "Cam looks so cute!" When she looked up at me, the expectation on her face made me want to put my head back between my knees. When I met Ava, she was working as a teacher's aide at an elementary school. Jasmine had introduced me to her at a bar where Cam and I used to hang out after a full day of installing internet in the apartments of college students and explaining Wi-Fi to their grandparents down the road. The 4 of us sat around a high-top table, feet dangling. Jasmine and Ava spoke animatedly about the children in their kindergarten classroom. Ava spoke with a passion I admired. "I just love them. They're my babies," she said. "Do you want children?" Jasmine flushed. She and Cam had only been together for a handful of months at that point. Ava remained unaware of her own forwardness. "I mean, yes, I do," Jasmine admitted, her face just barely giving away her anxiety over Cam's answer. "I like little kids," Cam shrugged in her nonchalant way, her arm draped over the back of her seat. Jasmine glowed. "I don't want kids," I declared, though no one had asked. I felt my toes beginning to tingle as my thighs dug into the edge of my chair. "We know," Jasmine said, laughing. "You never shut up about it." "I want a baby so badly," Ava said, looking directly at me. The road we were driving on had been bleached a light gray in the Georgia sun. The yellow paint that ran down the middle had faded until it was barely visible, and potholes crept up frequently enough that Ava had to keep swerving so as to not bottom out her sedan. Occasionally, on either side of the road, the mossy oak trees would part to reveal a trailer park. Yellowed homes sat in haphazard rows, tall grass growing up the sides, nearly consuming the narrow porches. Several times, the trees retreated to reveal small one-story houses, often with chip paint or peeling siding, sitting on gray cinder blocks the same crumbling color as the road. Rusted metal parts surrounded one house in particular. I spotted what looked like a boat propeller and a stack of old tires, several of which looked bigger than Ava's car. It was almost romantic with the canopy of trees draping over it. For a moment, I forgot about Cam's incident and thought about asking Ava to pull over and ask the owner about the boat propeller. Maybe I could hang it on the wall. Ava hated clutter, though, and it wouldn't have gone with any of her decorations. When we arrived at the motel, Ava disclosed that we were here to visit a small tourist trap of a town modeled after a Bavarian village. She showed me photos and clarified that the damp motel we had stopped at was actually in Cleveland, Georgia, since it was cheaper than staying in the village itself. More splintered one-story houses in wide-open fields filled with sheep surrounded Cleveland. The village was situated just a little ways up a small mountain, and as we drove there the next day, we passed under several pink billboards that had babies superimposed on them, always accompanied by a cartoon cabbage surrounding a baby's head at its center. Each sign read, Babyland General Hospital, and gave directions from our current location. Babyland? I said after we passed the third billboard, hoping to get a chuckle out of Ava. When I looked over to see her reaction, though, I knew she had already seen the signs. We have to go! She paused. It looks so weird. I bet it's creepy. I didn't like the idea of it. I wasn't sure what to expect from a place named Babyland, and I was sure there'd be kids and families all over the place. I'd stick out. The set of her jaw was reminiscent of when she spoke about her kindergartners, though, and I agreed to go. Ava and I didn't start dating until well over a year after our first conversation. It was clear that Jasmine and Cam were always conspiring to bring us together, but we resisted, falling into a friendship full of easy discomfort. We could never quite get used to being around one another, but we enjoyed each other's presence. One day, though, as we sat in a booth across from Jasmine and Cam, who were telling us, for the third time, the story of how they had gotten engaged, Ava slid her cold hand up my thigh. Watching Cam and Jasmine kiss in the booth across from us, and thinking of my mother, bitter and single at 65, I grabbed her hand. From there we relaxed. We were disjointed and unwieldy people, and that seemed to work for us. Our bodies fit together at awkward angles. We moved in together, stacking ourselves around each other, accommodating for each other's missteps, learning to communicate in our awkward and avoidant ways. I let her make most decisions, where to eat, what to hang on the wall. The subject of children didn't come up for a long time. When it finally did, I shrugged it off, telling her I wasn't sure what I wanted in the future. I had found something comfortable with Ava, and my past convictions felt a little less rigid. Well, you know how I feel, she stated. I nodded, and she continued. I hate the idea of giving birth, though. That's one of the nice things about dating a woman. I don't have to. It hadn't occurred to me that Ava would expect me to carry a baby. What about adoption? It's so hard to get a baby through adoption, though. For the first time in my life, I imagined what it would be like to be pregnant, but instead of something warm and natural, I felt as though my ribs would fracture outward and advertise the state of my organs. What do you want for your future? Ava asked me one night, several months later. She had her head on my chest and a cool breeze was coming in through the window. The way she had said your future threw me off. We had always discussed things in terms of our future. I thought for a moment. I had always thought I'd go back to school, but I didn't hate my job. I thought of traveling and quiet nights in a fireplace. I imagined the easy way Cam and Jasmine laughed together. I think I want something like Cam and Jazz, I told her. Really? She asked. I would have thought you didn't want the same things they want. I knew she meant children, but I was desperate to avoid the conversation. I like what they have right now. Okay. The word curves upward at the end, making her tone sound hopeful. I wonder how she interpreted what I told her, but she didn't continue the conversation, and soon her breathing grew heavy as she fell asleep. One night, she sat on my bed and watched me undress after work. I took off my company polo shirt to reveal how the soft skin of my stomach spilled over my belt. As I moved to undo the belt, suddenly Ava was in front of me, her cold fingers touching my hand gently to stop me. She lowered herself to her knees, placing her hands on either side of my stomach, kissing it over and over. My voice wavered at a much higher pitch than I was used to. She angled her head back up towards my face and smiled. "Imagine if there was a baby in there," she cooed. And even though my skin suddenly felt like it was too tight for my body, I forced myself to laugh. "What's so funny?" Ava asked. "I still don't think I'm ready to think about that." "Well, we're not getting any younger. There's only so many years a woman can have a baby. I really just need more time," I said. I wanted to share my life with someone, with Ava, but when I imagined another being taking up space in my body, or waiting at the bus stop to pick up 3 little brown-haired children calling me mommy, and taking them home to a waiting Ava, losing myself in their busy lives, suddenly I couldn't breathe. I expected Ava to get up and change out of her own work clothes, but she didn't. She stayed there for a while, her hot breath sticking to my stomach. I put my fingers in her hair for a moment, but the gesture made it easier to picture myself with a bulging belly. I quickly dropped my hand. Fingers bowed outward as if to break themselves off of my hand. "Just consider it, please," Ava whispered into my stomach. On our last day in Georgia, Ava drove the car past the yellowed trailers and splintered houses and turned down a lane that opened up onto acres of cross-hatched emerald lawn. Far down at the end of the lane, we saw a huge white building with pristine Doric columns and the words Babyland General Hospital etched across its cornice. All around the building, a garden of rose bushes and wildflowers bloomed. Gardeners stood, trimming and prodding. As we drove closer, we saw dozens of cement statues of enormous rounded baby heads poking out of cabbages. Once we parked, Ava asked me to take pictures of her with several of the cement cabbages. We had to wait while parents took photos of their children sitting on the leaves. We entered through grand front doors behind a family. A blonde woman in her mid-30s held the hand of a little girl. Behind them trailed a man holding the hand of an even younger boy who was trying to skip ahead, but was hindered by his father's tight grasp. "This is going to be so special," the woman told the little girl. "I loved my Cabbage Patch Kids so much when I was growing up, and now you get to adopt one of your very own." The girl beamed up at her. "I want to adopt a baby," the little boy yelled, still tugging to get out of his father's grasp. "Boys don't want babies." The man snatched him up and carried him into the building. All the while, the boy tried to wiggle out of his grasp. We were greeted by 2 young women in scrubs who looked barely out of high school. I imagined this and the Walmart we passed on the way here were the only places to really get a job in high school here. They sat behind a long curved desk and beckoned us over to sign in. Once we had both printed and signed our names, the nurses told us we were free to look around. The foyer was lined with glass cases filled with dolls whose fabric was graying. Each doll was accompanied by a plaque giving their name and birth year. Dexter, 1978. Bruce Ashley, 1981. Delilah Lorinda, 1983. Bonnie Ellen and Jeffrey Wallace, twins, 2002. "Mine look just like this," the blonde woman explained to her daughter, pointing at a doll with red yarn pigtails. "I want one like that too." "Whatever you want, sweetheart." "Brayden, please, watch this with me." The man was sitting on the black couch in the center of the room. The little boy struggled to get off his father's lap while the voice of a NASCAR announcer could be heard playing loudly through the phone speaker. "I want to look at the babies!" Through a set of swinging double doors, we entered a hallway with 2 nurseries, one on each side. A middle-aged woman in pink scrubs greeted us. She had yellow teeth and smelled faintly of cigarettes. "Welcome! These nurseries hold our cabbage-born babies. Boys on the left, girls on the right. Our very own Georgia cabbages carry them for 9 months just like real babies. Each doll is birthed right here at Babyland General Hospital and will cost you around $295. Please feel free to touch them and pick them up. Are y'all interested in taking one of these babies home today?" We both told her no thank you and that we were just looking, but I felt Ava's grip on my hand tighten slightly. As we were leaving the hallway, we watched as the little girl picked a handmade doll with red yarn hair. Suddenly, I see an image of Ava trailing behind a little girl, grinning like she did in the car as the girl picked out a doll. Where would I be? Trailing behind? Would I have a heavy diaper bag? Would it be my job to distract our son from wanting an expensive toy like his sister? $295 could pay for a lot of other things. Ava approached me, hand outstretched to touch my pregnant belly as 5, 6, 7 children leapt and squealed for my attention, tugging on my arms, my hands, my clothes as I sunk to the floor, crushed under their weight, disappearing from sight. "Summer? Why did you stop? Let's go check out the next room." Next, we walked into a wide, open sales floor. Shelves were set up sporadically throughout the room, holding plastic-headed Cabbage Patch Kids that were much cheaper than the ones in the nursery, separate outfits, and other accessories. A crib sat off to one side, lined with more dolls, and at the very center of the floor loomed an enormous tree, casting its shadow over the entire room. The leaves of the tree overhead were filled with LED lights and fairies, toes pointed, wings glowing, fluttering. There was a stage at the base of the tree, and all along the outer edge and along the back wall were muted green cabbages holding rounded baby heads. Children ran erratically, from shelf to tree to crib to cabbage. Middle-aged women held Cabbage Patch Kids, sometimes several, floating between shelves, locked away in misty-eyed nostalgia. Ava and I walked around, examining dolls and outfits and cribs and cabbages. There were farmers' outfits, cheerleader outfits, roller skates, baseball caps, blankets, pacifiers, teething rings. We passed another young woman in scrubs. She walked past us, bouncing a baby up and down and shushing in order to soothe it. Following Ava's gaze, I turned to see the baby and realized that it was a doll she was holding and not a baby at all. Soon, a voice over a loudspeaker announced that a mother cabbage was in labor, and that meant a new Cabbage Patch Kid would be born in 10 minutes, so please begin to gather around the magic crystal tree. Well, we have to see that, Ava declared. Children began gathering around the base of the tree, jumping and squealing with anticipation. Parents gathered around the outer edges of the group, though the way they shuffled and bounced their legs told me they were equally as excited. I spotted Braden sitting on his father's knee. 2 women in their mid-20s stepped onto the platform and greeted us. Hello, everyone. We're so excited you're here to witness Mother Cabbage give birth. As you can see, this cabbage has begun to swell, which means she's in labor. 30 children craned their necks to watch the cabbage near the top of the platform pulsate. So the first thing we need to do is check to make sure Mother Cabbage is dilated. She pulled out what looked like a huge set of kitchen tongs and stuck them into the cabbage. Yep, it looks like she's about ready. Okay, kids, Mother Cabbage is going to need some encouragement because she's a little nervous. She might be in pain. She's worried her leaves won't look the same, won't feel or work the same. She's afraid they might tear off in the process, leaving her leafless. She's worried other cabbages won't find her sexy anymore, and that she won't be able to mate with any of them again. She hates that a living thing has been inside her body for months, growing and taking up her space, stealing her nutrients, her body no longer her own. She's afraid her cabbage body will start to rot, liquefying into putrid goo, her only accomplishment pushing an original Xavier Roberts Cabbage Patch Kid into this world. Her sour body mixing with the earth until she's leached into some other mother cabbage. So on the count of 3, everyone yell, push, and 30 children began to chant, push, 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 push. The nurse plunged her arms, elbow deep, into Mother Cabbage. Mother Cabbage wailed in pain. Push, 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 push. Triumphantly, the nurse pulled out a Cabbage Patch Kid, dripping in muted green fluid, from the depths of Mother Cabbage. The children and their parents cheered. And we have a boy, the nurse shouted, holding the dripping baby above her head to even louder cheers. She began wiping the fluid from the body of the doll and wrapped it in a blanket. Do we have a name for our little boy here? She asked the crowd. In the excitement, Braden had slipped away from his father and ran up to the stage. Braden! 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 He shouted. I looked to Braden's father, concerned, but he only sat with his head in his hand. Braden it is, the nurse beamed. Do we have a middle name? Lee, shouted another child. Welcome to the world, Braden Lee. Happy birthday, said the nurse. Now help me take him over here to the newborn nursery where he'll be weighed, measured, and given a newborn checkup, and he is available for adoption. As the crowd made its way to the nursery, I couldn't take my eyes off of Mother Cabbage. Now discarded by the crowd, she seemed to wither. We left behind Braden and his family. I knew you should have let me stay at the hotel with him, Braden's father hissed through his teeth at his wife. I know, she said, shaking her head. You were right. You always are. Meanwhile, Braden was once again struggling against the grasp of his father. Only this time he was screaming, his face turning purple as he pushed more air out of his lungs than there was in his body, devastated that he couldn't take home the baby he had named. Behind the 3 of them trailed his sister, cooing and shushing her red-headed baby. Ava, who wasn't paying attention to any of this, still lost in thoughts of Mother Cabbage, spoke up. See, this is why I never want to give birth, she said. The way it changes your body, the pain, that's something I'd never do. I nodded along with her. I thought of Cam in her baggy t-shirt and her easy posture, of her body that she now shared with someone else. Ava slid her cold fingers down my arm and started to intertwine them into mine, and suddenly I felt like I might vomit. "Don't fucking touch me!" I jerked my hand away, steering my body away from hers. "What?" She stopped walking, and so did I, staying out of reach. "I said don't touch me." "What?" she said again. "Why?" "Because I don't want you to. Isn't that enough?" I had curled my hands into fist and pulled my shoulders up to my ears. I felt my neck pinching from the posture, but it didn't bother me, not as much as her finger locking onto me had. I couldn't stand the thought of her pulling me into her car again, of taking me somewhere else, of not having a say. "You're being ridiculous," she said, eyeing Braden's parents who had stopped to watch. She took a step forward, reaching her hand out to grab my arm. "Come on, let's talk about this in the car." I took a step back, staying out of her reach. "Stop!" I choked on the word. It was new to my tongue. "What has gotten into you?" Ava asked through clenched teeth, her voice lowered as if scolding a child in public. "I don't want to do this, Ava." She paused, suddenly looking as if she might cry. "Can't do what?" "This! I can't do this!" I gestured to the grandiose plaster behind me. "I can't have a baby for you. I don't want kids. I don't want to be pregnant. I don't want you touching me like that." She was definitely crying now, and I had to look away. I couldn't stand to see her cry, and she knew that. "We've been together for 3 years, Summer," she said eventually. I could hear anger rising in her voice. "Why am I just now hearing about this? In this fucking parking lot." She wasn't yelling. She was on the verge of sobbing. I glanced at her and felt like I might crumple. I should take it back, but the image of Mother Cabbage was still stained inside my head. Her leaves beginning to wilt, liquefy. "It's my body." My voice was quieter now. "So are you ending things then?" Ava had folded her arms across her chest. She wasn't looking at me, but her voice had steadied a bit. "I don't know. Is this a deal breaker?" "I don't know." She turned and started walking toward the car. "Wait," I said. "I think I want to drive."
Hayley says that she tends to write about awkward and uncomfortable things. She is really into postmodernism and post-postmodernism, as Dr. Hoffman would say. She thinks fragmentation and surrealism capture these weird interactions that we have that fuel our life experiences and affect us significantly. Our next selection is Clay-Filled Grave, a short story by Joquin Macias. Joaquin is a senior English major here at Winthrop. He writes to make sense of the monologues ringing in his head. In his writing, he doesn't know where he's going, and he's not sure about where he's been, but he knows that he has to keep on moving.
This is Clay-Filled Grave, originally published in The Hunger Winter 2020. My sister and I split 5 tabs of acid at a house party on the 1-year anniversary of El Viejo's death. Since I'm his favorite customer, Sal offered me 5 for 30, and even though it was Maria's first trip, I thought she'd be able to handle 2.5 hits. We dropped in an upstairs bedroom with walls covered in green and blue tapestries as bongs, blunts, and bowls were passed round and round and round. We half knew everyone in the room, and they knew us collectively as the Bolanos twins. At the door of the party, I told Maria we'd only take the acid, but in that sea of people pressed together with smoke instead of air, we took drags of joints tasting of whiskey, shots of bong water-flavored vodka, and whatever else the party passed us. I cheered on a brunette chugging a bottle of gas station rosé. Maria hovered at my elbow. I started wading through the crowd because I saw a girl with a half-shaved head of blue hair who I'd never seen before, but Maria yanked my arm back. "I don't feel any glue." I shoved her off me. "I don't know anyone else here." She grabbed my elbow again. "Well, if you talk to other people," I pushed her again, "like I'm trying to, it wouldn't be a problem." She flipped me off and I walked up to the girl. I watched Maria out of the corner of my eye. "Sup, I'm Ignacio," I shouted over the music. Maria shuffled up to a guy and waved. His back was turned to her. "Oh, hi." She pointed at herself. "Clara. How'd you end up at this party, Clara?" Maria talked to the guy's back. "I have a couple classes with Chelsea." "Oh, you're a college girl. What's your major?" I leaned in. Maria waved goodbye to the guy's back and wandered out of sight. "Anthropology. I should go find my girlfriend." I Have a good time, dude, I said as she slipped into the crowd. Maria appeared next to me. She was a lesbian, right? At least I talked to someone. He wouldn't turn around. The music's too loud. Ah, poor, tragic Maria. Let me show you how it's done. I turned and tried talking to some guy with gelled back hair and podium cheekbones, holding up 2 blazed green eyes. But the eyes swiveled away from me, as if they hadn't heard a word. So I tried to find another face to talk to and kept turning and kept turning and kept turning as the crowd pressed in, closer and closer and closer. The music crashed through and circled above me like the stained glass cherubs when my mom led me down the church aisle to communion. As I stared at the back of a sweat-soaked beige plaid shirt, the smell of incense floated in the air and mixed with weed. I found myself squatting in the middle of the party, choking on the smell of spilled beer and Sunday church sweat and dog shit coming from the floor, but I couldn't stand with those fat angels floating down with their wings beat bashing my skull. Maria forced me up and led me to tear through the crowded room. She used me to break through walls of fishnets, leather jackets, and what the fucks as she whispered, almost, almost, almost. We fell through a door onto a gray square of concrete, under a flickering light, under a rotting shingle roof, under a crescent moon, over a tattered umbrella, over a pair of shivering children, thrown out of their home by their drunk father, flinging books and forks and crucifixes after losing his 3rd job that month. Maria slapped me. Come back. Slap. I blinked away at LVAO's memory, but he kept ripping back to the front of my mind, greasy, gray-black patchwork stubble, the back of a hand with a scarred over welt, a nose hanging to the left. Slap! I sat up on the concrete with Maria standing over me. The circles of statues watched us. I tried saying, I'm okay, but I don't know if it came out. Maria laughed. You're crying like a little bitch. Confusion and relief breathed life into the statues who stomped out cigarettes and filed back into the party. I laid back, watching the stars dance around the sky, and reassured myself that I was just on drugs and had nothing to fear. Besides, dwelling on your dead dad is a party foul. I stood to go back to the party and try to find the girl with the least self-esteem, but then Maria shrieked. She curled up and shivered as sweat poured down her face. He's coming. Hey, listen to me. You're safe. No one is coming. He's at the door. There's no door because we're outside and we're safe. I promise. I grabbed her wrist and brushed her palm against the dirt. Slack-jawed, her chin rolled down as she watched the grass slide under her fingers and spring back up. He's doing this, she muttered. His ghost hid in those tabs. He's been waiting for the chance. I didn't believe her, but when her eyes glazed over again, I forgot to disagree. I reached out to stop her from falling back to dead memories, but she marched into the dark yard and wandered in circles, staring at her feet. She looked around and bolted to the back of the yard. I realized I should intervene before she hurt herself, so I ran to her. She went into a tool shed, but I stopped at the door. I didn't want to go into the shed, because imagining Maria going for hatchets or saws to cut El Viejo's ghost out of us just gave me a bad vibe. Maria emerged with a shovel and a gardening trowel. She handed the trowel to me. We're going to stop him. She walked past me toward the street, and as she disappeared into the night, I remember Sal floating in a pool for hours, insisting he was a duck while 4 of us tried getting him out. I knew I couldn't talk her down, so I thought about going back into the party, and then I remembered Sal shouting quack quack as he jumped off his roof later that night, thinking he could fly, and ran after her. I followed her along the road as the concrete breathed. She marched like the bishop at a confirmation mass with a shovel as her crozier, but I stopped going to church years ago. And yet I still follow her, like a rat-faced altar boy sweating under a thick cotton collar, and her wordless determination pissed me off as the cheap shoes from Ross I picked to wear to a party where I could have been striking out for the 4th time that night instead of hiking through town rubbed my ankles raw. I hoped they wouldn't rub too raw and end up bleeding on these socks, because I was running out of wearable white socks and bleaching blood out would be hell. And if I complained about it, Maria would say it was my fault, just like she did when we were in high school, and I stayed up all night to do my homework after I finished hers because you chose to do it. I did it to help her, even though she never asked, but if I watched as she spiraled and flunked out, then it'd be my fault too. And what kind of brother would I be if I let her fall so far? But now she expected me to go along with her no matter what, without showing any fucking gratitude for all the shit I went through to keep her safe without ever knowing where she led us. But this time, I knew what she was making us do. But I needed to hear her tell me. Maria, what are we doing? We're stopping him. She didn't turn. You said that already. How are we stopping a dead man? We're going to break him. Like he's trying to break us. Maria, if the trip is going to break you, I'll just call Sile and get us some Klonopin. That won't stop him from haunting us. Fucking really? The acid is just freaking you out. We should just go back to the party. I'll even introduce you to that guy you were trying to talk to. She spun around and thrust her shovel in my face. We're stopping him. Maria pushed the shovel under my chin and repeated, we're stopping him. I wanted to run from my sister as her hardened face began to resemble our father, as if his ghost possessed her and forced the shovel into my face. I heard him, you think you're a man, mijo? I felt my face burn. You think you're a fucking man? I sputtered an excuse as I felt my throat closing. The shovel pulled back. I saw Maria's face soften. She stared into her shovel as if it were a mirror. She had to see him in herself as well. You can go back, she said, running a finger along the edge of the shovel. But I need to do this. She turned away and went down the road, but I couldn't let her go. She's my sister, and she'd never abandon me. Because I'm her brother. The first time Maria tried running away, she left at midnight a few months after our mom died. She woke me up and rushed me out of the house. I thought it was a dream at first. When we got a block away, I told her I could stay and stop him from trying to find her. What kind of sister would I be if I left you behind? I ran to catch up to her. We arrived at St. Monica's Catholic Cemetery and found the gate locked, and Maria started climbing the fence. I hesitated. I didn't know if the old groundskeeper, Mr. Brown, was still alive. If he saw two Mexicans trying to get into his cemetery, no less than 6 cruisers would surround us in seconds to stop the armed gangsters he would swear he saw. Maria was disappearing into a sea of graves, so I hopped the fence and hoped Mr. Brown was dead or asleep. After I climbed to the other side, a dog's bark boomed around me. I threw myself into a bush. A German shepherd didn't rush around the corner, so I climbed out. Picking leaves out of my hair, I raced to catch up to Maria at El Viejo's grave, until I tripped and fell flat on a pile of fresh dirt. I rolled over and a long-necked, gaping-mouthed behemoth loomed over me. I scrambled off until I could get on my feet and run. I found her as she spat on his headstone and stabbed her shovel into reddish-brown dirt. I pulled away bits with my trowel while Maria tried to tunnel. I stopped to breathe and looked at the headstone. Eduardo V. Bolanos Sr. I wanted to drive my trowel into it and dig out the senior. I changed my name a week after Maria and I moved out to spite him. I called him that afternoon to tell him he's not a senior without a junior, but he kept it to say, I still own you. That was the last time we spoke before he died. Maria chucked her shovel to the side, standing in a 1/2-foot deep divot. She turned and kicked the headstone. Are you hiding from me? Maria, come on, we're not going to get him. I grabbed her arm, but she slapped me away, staring into the dark. She cocked her head to the side and rushed off. I trailed behind her. She went straight toward a yellow taxi cab left in the graveyard. A leftover taxi that could have been our way out of here, but as Maria climbed into the cab, I saw the behemoth's neck slithering from the roof and tank treads on its sides and realized it was a digger standing watch over a fresh grave. I don't think this is a great idea, I called, but she didn't hear me as she rummaged around. The engine revved alive. Stupid gringos, she laughed. Left the keys in here. Don't I know the Mexicans moved to town? You don't even have a license. Stop being a pussy. She drove the digger toward El Viejo's grave. I tried to run behind, but saw the claw hanging off the back and imagined it taking my head off. So I hung back as she ran over graves, knocked over headstones, and cackled. I checked the road for flashing lights, ready to grab Maria and run. She slowed as she got to El Viejo's grave. I walked up as the claw started flexing. Maria leaned on a stick and urged the claw down. It scraped against El Viejo's headstone and pressed on the ground. The machine groaned, and I thought I saw the tread starting to lift up. I jumped into the cab and yanked the stick back. The claw retracted. Maria and I pushed and pulled the sticks and levers until we could control the claw. Through the fog glass, Maria couldn't see the ground, so I stood opposite the grave and shouted directions. The first scoop scraped into the packed dirt with grass like El Viejo's stubble that I see cropping up in the mirror when I forget to shave. It nudged and tipped the headstone. The second scoop tore up 2 handfuls of grass and flipped the headstone. I guided her to break into the clay-filled grave. I stole glances to the road, always expecting the cruiser that never came. The claw scraped against something at the bottom of the hole. Maria froze and moved the claw again. When the scraping floated out again, Maria flew out of the cab and jumped into the hole with sloping sides and ragged edges. She ripped into the dirt with her nails. I almost threw myself in the hole to help her, but threw the trowel down first. She dug around the edge just enough to tear the coffin open, revealing a paper-skinned corpse with sunken eyes and wispy hair. I took a step back into a wall of dirt. El Viejo laid at peace. His skin faded white, his jaw unclenched, His eyes had sunk back into his head where they once bulged. I only recognized him from the faint hint of patchwork stubble silhouetting his jaw. Maria stood over him as if she thought El Viejo's eyes would shoot open when she threw open the casket. She stared and waited for him to make the first move. She brought the trowel down on his skull. "Baboso!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Pendejo, maldito, puto, piece of shit, mother, fucker!" The shovel pierced his skull, separating the nose from the mouth. She leaned on it, panting. Her mouth hung slack. I tried to pull her out of the grave, but she kept throwing my hands off her. She stared down at El Viejo. The corner of her lip curled up and a giggle escaped. She started chuckling, and then came a booming laughter so strong that even the corpse's mouth flew open and guffawed. I gave into the raucous laughter as we came together as a family.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Winthrop CWP. If you are a Winthrop student or alumni and have a story that you want to share, email us at thecwppodcast@gmail.com.